What if I told you that your sketchbook is more than a collection of drawings? It's a window into your creativity. It's problem solving. It's an artistic journey. It's whether you're applying for education or if you're stepping into creative industries. A sketchbook tells your individual story. It tells about your expertise, your skills, your inspiration, what you do in your day to day, your habits, your rituals. So let's dive into sketchbooks. Welcome to the BlueMogu Big Education Podcast. Today we're diving into the power of sketchbooks, why they matter, what key skills you should showcase, and what are the industry expectations. The first key takeaway is that final ideas are not instant. Sketchbooks are not a final piece of work. They're a developmental process. They capture your ideas, your inspiration, the experiments, the working with materials, the different ideas that you have, the writing, the annotation that you do around the work to help explore and explain how your idea process has come about so that you've not just taken it from somebody else's idea, developed by yourself. All portfolios can be in a sketchbook, but not all sketchbooks are in portfolios. So what do I mean by that? It sounds a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? But all portfolios can be in sketchbooks, as in your development process of taking your idea from something that's just a concept, it's just something you've thought about and a scribble on a piece of paper, that's gone all the way to that final stage that's refined and it's something that's beautiful and ready to deliver, often the thing that we're ready to show somebody, that's the final a portfolio piece. And that's can be in your sketchbook, but in a portfolio it's something that's a bit more refined. You might have several pieces that are finished works and you might have a small bit of description or a showing of what your sketchbook process has been, but very condensed. But a portfolio is largely your final pieces. So in your sketchbook, you might not have all of your drawings and things like that. Your sketchbook is your idea. It's something that's you often protected. It's something that's kind of sacred to you, and it depends on how you look at it. So if you're waking up in the morning and spending 10 minutes like journaling and scribbling down some ideas, drawing some things, or sitting in your favourite coffee shop and drawing the cup of coffee in front of you and a passerby in the window, scribbling it down quickly, or doing a continuous line drawing, for example, something like that. Those are all things that are valuable in your sketchbook and something that you will develop, especially as a young creative. You'll start to develop a routine of things where you're trying to express your ideas in different ways, in different media, and that's what a sketchbook is about, in my opinion. Why sketchbooks matter? So in higher education, when you're applying to university, in higher educational institutions especially, art and design, architecture, fashion, those types of things, where there's a lot of thinking in terms of something that's a concept that turns into something that's might be a physical object, for example, like a dress or an installation or a sculpture or something. There's a process to develop an idea to something that you're finally ready to commit, especially if it's in a three-dimensional way or a film or a photograph or something like that. To transition from an idea on paper to something that's final, that's often a portfolio piece. So in higher education, applications teams and enrollment teams, admissions teams, they're looking to understand your thinking process and your individuality, where you take inspiration from, and essentially your own thought path, your story. That's the key takeaway of this. Showing your individuality through a sketchbook, but showing it in a variety of ways that's structured and shows that you have a logical approach of, for example, if you're experimenting with drawing and fine art and mark making, and then taking those practice ideas and practice research where we've looked at, for example, Van Gogh mark making, and then taking that into something of where I might take my own photographs, a passerby or somebody that you care about, and then using that technique, that style, to redo something in that style is a good way of developing processes, especially if we're looking at traditional art forms where we're looking at realism or mark making, where you need a lot of expression and practice to kind of make it good. So using materials that are your own, your primary research, your photographs, your ticket stubs, the magazines that you use, all of those things, that's stuff that you're gathering together. Primary research is really useful for sketchbooks. It's really useful to show your individual journey and your inspirations. And that's something that application teams in particular will look for. For industry sketchbooks, it's quite a little bit different. So it's more about rapid idea generation. So these are things where we might think about if it's a product, for example, that we're developing, and you might have a certain amount of volume, and we can experiment with a shape, for example, or we know that there's a water bottle shape, for example, Stanley water bottles are popular now, but the design of that shape, there might have been a variety of different shapes, styles, cup holder, handles, those types of things before it even got to that final form. So I imagine that somebody has got an industry style sketchbook where it's a lot of different styles of cup, of different handles, different shapes, bevels and things like that, and then working with the techniques that they know are in that industry, with the manufacturing techniques that they've got in those industries or are available to that company. So the industry sketchbook will be a little bit more focused. It will be about rapid idea generation, and there might be some focused use of techniques, so more pencil techniques perhaps, or technical diagrams, quick watercolour sketches for colours, or use of Posca markers, like industry standard Pantone style colours, that type of thing, where there's a technical focus to it for the most part. It's less about having pretty pages, it's more about conveying ideas in a visual way, in a fast way, and often for people that are not as creative as you might be, and need a visual process and need to be able to talk through it. It's useful for pitch decks and things like that, where you're showing an array of ideas. So just to recap on that, there's quite a lot of information. So essentially, it's to convey some visual ideas, a variety of different techniques. It's to respond to different types of research, whether it's your own research, your primary research, primary photographs, primary experiences, and expand on those styles. And you take inspiration from different artists, print them out, stick them in the book, say, I've taken inspiration from this, I'd like to use this type of mark making, or I'd like to use this kind of artist colour palette, or their pottery and ceramics have inspired me and I'd like to use this type of drawing style or graphic technique, for example. It shows you how you can work to different briefs. For example, D&AD have a great range of briefs on the website, which are kind of like live companies, and you can understand, if you have a look at those, about how industry would like to use idea generation and how you might pitch that. And it's a great opportunity if you're a little bit later down the line, you're looking in your university studies about refining your sketchbook and refining your portfolio. Do check out resources like that, or even just in your own time, you can apply and you can pitch your own ideas for that. Sketchbooks, they're about learning crafts. They're about making mistakes as well. It's really important to note that. Expressing yourself and then annotating and reflecting on what went wrong, what went right, what you would do next time. If you don't have enough time to finish it off, or you feel like you've exhausted some of that idea, some of the reflection might be what you would do if you had more time. And it could be a variety of different things. I've given a couple of examples about how you might use digital skills, using mobile art, for example, doing that on the go while you're on the bus. You can have like a stylus on a touchscreen phone, or you can use your finger. You can do Procreate and things like that to animate basic drawings and things like that. But sketchbooks, for me, especially when I was studying, it was mainly about kind of cutting up magazines. It was very tactile. It was collage, mixed media, using paints, using stick, ink, bleach, watercolor brushes and things like that, mixing it together. And one of my favourite techniques to do was I would take some photographs, I would print them out, I would then get some tracing paper or put it against the window, and I would do a continuous line drawing around it, either in pencil or in fine liner pen, and then I would use a paintbrush with some water and some watercolours, or even just water itself, and I would bleed the ink around it to create some shadow effects. And then I'd use that as a basis of experimentation. I might do several of those drawings, I might do several different subject areas, and then I would start to I could photocopy that and then start to work over it with different materials, or I could just take a photo of that as a reference, print that out, stick it in again, and then I could rework. So I've got evidence of a series where I've took it from a photo to something where I've drawn over it and created like a almost like a tracing, like a black and white stencil of it around it, and it could be quite detailed. And then I'd be reworking. So there's a developmental process there. What to show? So we've covered a couple of those things just in those ideas there. But it's your idea development, it's your brainstorming, your concept. It could be that one page of the sketchbook is just about ideas. It could be just thinking about, if we stick on the idea of a cup, for example, what is a cup? What does it look like? What colour is it? What shape is it? Who uses it? Why did they use it? How old are they? Just brainstorming things like that, and that will give you an idea of how you can delve into a bit more research of what those people like, why that colour's become popular, why people like pastels more these days, that type of thing. Or even shapes, and you taking inspiration from different eras. It could be Cubism, it could be Impressionism, and taking colour palettes from that, printing off a painting, for example, something like that, and then using Photoshop colour picker, or using your watercolours, using your paints and mixing those colours and making a colour palette. That's a page, or that's 2 pages of a sketchbook, or it could be several pages of a sketchbook where you're looking at colour just as its own colour in its own right, or typography in its own right, or photography, or lighting and things like that. You're just exploring a kind of a small element before you even got to a concept of what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. And you might have, often some of the ideas that we have in the beginning, they might even be the best ideas, but actually it's worth the development of it, because you can't experiment enough with those ideas. They can always evolve into something else. They can always evolve into something different, or different media, and answer the question in a different way. And I say question because it's a kind of a brief. When you're working in the creative industries, you're working to a brief, essentially, of what a customer wants, or what you're trying to convey as a question. And we'll go on to that in a bit more detail in other elements, different podcasts. And observational drawings are a great one. So I used to enjoy sitting in a coffee shop. I used to take the train to university, but I'd sit in a coffee shop beforehand, and I'd just draw people. I'd sketch. I'd do continuous line drawings. I used to love doing those, where you don't take your pen off the page. You just have to keep going. It creates a kind of like ovoid technique where you're overlaying and creating different hues and shadows and contrasting effects, and that's a form of experimentation. It's showing that you're observing things, you're practicing a technique, you're doing it regularly to try and refine it, and you're exploring different avenues of how you could answer the question, what it looks like, what colour is it, what technique is it, what style is it. And then for me, I found that was a really good way to experiment with that kind of media, and practice continuous line, and use that as a storytelling device. So part of your sketchbook is often at the start of your sketchbook, it might be something, you might look back at the things at the start of your sketchbook and think, I don't really like that, I want to remove it. But actually that's a really valuable part of your sketchbook, to be able to see a development in your style, in your inspirations, in your refinement of your technique. And it's not about the end of your sketchbook necessarily becoming a final piece. It's about showing that story, showing that narrative, showing that problem solving of where you think things have gone wrong, writing about it, reflecting on it, and then bringing it to something that eventually will become a portfolio piece. And your portfolio piece might be in your sketchbook, but your sketchbook might not always be in your portfolio. I only work digital. So what? Some people, you can show your development. You can take screenshots on your mobile art if you're using your laptop and manipulating things, save iterations of things, do photo 1, photo 2, photo version 3, photo version 4, those types of things. Keep a record, print it out, put it in a sketchbook, draw over it, or write about it, or even do it. You can keep it in a blog format. Like Behance is great. On there, you'll probably see more. You'll see more portfolio-based things, but there's definitely a lot of sketchbook and development work there. But you can treat of it similar to like a blog, where you're telling a story of development. Can still be through digital work. Annotations are really important, and if you're doing digital work on your computer or on your phone and uploading it, you can still do primary research, upload your photos of things that you're taking photographs of, or your secondary research where you're looking at different artists, and you can easily provide references of those resources as well. You can just copy the link and attribute your research easily. So it's not to say if a digital sketchbook might look different, but it's a sketchbook nonetheless. Equally, just on those points, you can print out things, you can use mixed media, you can collage, or you can, and then once you've done that in your sketchbook, whatever it looks like, you can still take it back into Illustrator, you can still take it back into Photoshop, or you can animate it in Procreate, or whichever style you end up going to. But you can still mix both, and that's the key takeaway for that. The process is the key point. So if you thought about product design, again, you're telling a long story of something that's an idea, it's a shape, it's somebody's idea essentially, and taking that to a final thing. That's what your sketchbook's about. I like this diagram here for the creative cycle, and I think it's something that we can all take inspiration from, and it's a really good thing. You might even want to print this out to put in your sketchbooks as well, just to remind you at the start of it, or to explain how you think your process works, or how you thought it would work at the beginning, and then how you've explained it to the admissions team, for example, as your style's developed. So here we've got research, where it might be something where you might be doing it on the internet. Again, citing your sources, showing your references. You might be going directly to the library. You might be photocopying some old books of paintings and things like that. Or you might be having some experiences where you're taking photographs, you're in the coffee shop, you're doing your continuous line drawings, or you're taking photographs, that type of thing. And then your ideation is where you're bringing that to life. You're using that research, you're using those magazines that you've cut out, you're using those photographs that you've taken, and you're starting to think, how do I manipulate that on Photoshop, or can I trace that and use the watercolor technique that I mentioned before? And then you're brainstorming. It could be the idea mind map, where you've got your target audiences, or what the shapes are that you're thinking about, or what colours you might be using. And all of these things are starting to come together like a vision board, aren't they? And then moving a little bit further down, we've got development, where we're looking at kind of how the idea develops. So if you've got your photograph, you've started to experiment with it, using some artist styles and things like that. How is it developing, and how is it still answering a question? Or how, if your question is just to experiment with that style, how did Van Gogh use that mark making technique, and then how can I recreate it? And then how can I use that style later in my own work, using my own photographs as reference, or going out and, taking the train somewhere and doing some mark making, or just walking through the city, sitting on a park bench and doing some mark making with a fine line pen or a Posca marker, that type of thing. And then the revision is essentially your reflection, you're critiquing your own work, you're critiquing your ability to develop that idea, you're critiquing what you would do better, what you would do different, or if you didn't have enough time and you didn't have enough, or you didn't have those materials to hand, or something moved you away from it, then what would you do next time? You can think about it in this kind of transition. So what is the subject? What is the focus? What is the media? And what is the outcome? These kind of four things are key development parts. and then you might have several different drawings, you might have several different experimentations in each of these before you get to a final piece. So again, we can think of it as receiving a question or receiving the problem, which is either you want to develop, or it might be a design brief from the D&AD that I gave an example of before. You have your initial ideas where you're sketching a couple of bits, you're brainstorming, you're having to think about what it might look like, what kind of materials you would use, what's the subject, what's the form, those types of things. And then once you started to develop, you're just analysing, you're reflecting and having to think about how it was useful, what you would do differently. So this is a good example of what the subject is. We got some fruit. We're thinking about shape, we're thinking about colour, we're thinking about tone. These are all sketches before something has been developed into some kind of final piece. Observing and sketching. So we're thinking, even if your end aim is something that's digital, sketching can be really helpful just to kind of structure things. It's the quickest way that I find to get an idea onto paper. I find it much faster than doing any kind of mobile art or some things like that. And I always really like to have something where I've taken a photograph myself, and then using that as my inspiration and then drawing from it. I find that very useful. These are some just examples, some visual examples of what a sketchbook might look like. So we've got some a watercolor inspiration from this this painting, and then somebody beside it has used a color palette. They've done it with, looks like could be watercolors or some Posca markers or something like that, some basic paints. And then below we've got an example of mark making where it's the Van Gogh that I mentioned before, and they've used some mixed media. They've not done acrylics and stuff like that. They might be more interested in collage and things like that. They've got some watercolour, they've got a couple of strips of tissue to put some pops of colour. You've got a clear colour palette where they've showed which colours they're wanting to use, and then they've got a kind of series, haven't they, of different studies. So this looks like this student, if I remember rightly, they've used the Van Gogh piece as an inspiration and done a couple of studies with these thumbnail studies where it's kind of a zoomed in area of that painting, and tried to replicate some of these marks that he's making, the different swirls, the different they might look a little bit like scribbles, but showing some different kind of form or different clouds, and then it's practicing how to use that. So this is more of a fine art portfolio perspective. But the thumbnails are a really good, useful way. And then there's a bigger study on the right hand side that we can see, and then there's an attribute to the reference, which is Van Gogh, and then what painting it is, when it was painted, to make sure that we're showing this is our inspiration. And then there will also be a little bit more annotation about why you've done that study, what materials you've used. There's kind of an ink here, so it's stick ink probably. And then maybe a little bit of watercolor as well, so it's the style that I mentioned before that I enjoy. And then these are all different sizes of paper, aren't they? It's tactile, so when you're folding the paper over, you can lift things up, you can open it. There might be ticket stubs and things, or pictures that you put in there, photos, and you've attached it into your sketchbook or physically stuck it in there. It's a tactile form, and it's enjoyable to use. It's enjoyable for you to physically handle your sketchbook and then see it, and as it grows as well, especially when you're sticking things in, you'll see your sketchbook grow, and it's like watching it grow and develop your ideas. And then reflection is just key. It's really key to use your sketchbook, and then that's how you're taking things into your final stages of development and portfolio, by reflecting on what's gone well and what you feel is not. Inside your portfolio, it's really important just to find things that inspire you. So if you're not feeling especially inspired at the moment, have a look through Behance, have a look through Pinterest, have a look on D&AD, have a look on fashion websites, find out what your interests are, or just use your day-to-day interests. Or, for example, if it's games, use the games as an inspiration of technical drawing skill. There's a lot of technical skill that goes into that. I remember a student where he was fascinated with kind of tanks and the technical drawing skills and product drawing skills, and he had a real good skill of being able to draw things from different perspectives and being able to simplify very technical things like a camera, for example, to be able to simplify that into a line drawing. And he lent on that as a skill and transferred his like traditional drawing skills, where you'd be able to use mark making, stippling, technical line drawing, continuous line, and then transition that by scanning it in and then making it digital, working on AI, and then using different hues and color palettes and things, and had a really, really successful portfolio. So lean on the things that inspire you, whether it's color, shape, software, movement, subjects, a simple topic, or an era in time. Wait to curate. Patience is the game with sketchbooks. Repetition, using it as a ritual, developing it, nurturing it, and the reflection is all part of it, and it will come. And you will notice, like I mentioned before, at the start of your portfolio, you might think, it's terrible, I want to rip it out. But actually, that development piece, you will learn from it, and you will show that growth. You will show as your sketchbook expands, your skills expand, your critique, your reflection expands the way that you will work. So wait till you curate your sketchbook or your portfolio, and try to keep everything in your sketchbook that you can. You can refine it a little bit later, where there's things where you might put too much development in some areas, or less in others, to kind of balance it out. But that will come. And ask for feedback. You can book in for a review session, a one-to-one review session, and we can run through a portfolio, that type of thing. Do that quite regularly. And don't be afraid to show people your development work. There's a tendency for when you're developing things, or developing new skills in particular, that you protect it. You protect your sketchbook. You don't want people to see, because it's not perfect. But don't be afraid to do that. People might recommend some artist, or they might recommend some technique, or they might show you it, or one of your peers might be learning some different software skills, and they might say, oh right, that might look really good if you did this, and then they can show you how to do it on Photoshop or Illustrator or After Effects or something like that. So using those connections and communicating with people is key, and then they can also give you advice on how to curate your sketchbook and your portfolio later down the line. To run into a couple of things that you might want to think about if you're going into a specific stream like graphics, animation, or digital, you want visual problem solving, you want a way of where you've took an idea through your sketchbook through to a final piece, essentially. So all those development pieces, all those scribbles, all those photographs, all of the mixed media collages, how it gets to a final piece. And then generally, when you've got a final piece, to have maybe 1, 2, 3 versions of that final piece, and then one of those will go into your portfolio. So you might have 3 final pieces where you've got your 3 technical skills and you're happy with that, and then one of them you might work on a little bit more, and that would be a significant portfolio piece that you would have. You might be able to show in a university application, you will probably show a bit of the development of that, or your 3 pieces in a series, maybe, depending on how much value it has to what you want to apply to, and what kind of story you want to tell. You might want to give examples of typography or different text, different symbols, different characters, or different languages that you might be able to show or translate or communicate visually, kind of a feeling. Have examples of a timeline. This is it could be an infographic, for example, or an infographic you might tell a process or a story, or how to do something. That's a very popular way. Good thing to start you off is to think about how would you show visually your morning routine of waking up, putting the kettle on, making a cup of coffee, brushing your teeth or making some breakfast, how would you show that in a very step-by-step process? A little bit like an IKEA flat pack assembly diagram, that type of thing. Or an airport, when you're on the airplane, the kind of little pamphlet that you get to show you health and safety. You'd need to show an understanding of colour and colour theory or colour use. Again, those palettes that we showed before, it's watercolour or using Poscas, using Pantone, that type of thing, and showing kind of a story. So just a story of how you've taken all the things that we've mentioned throughout this into something from that's a development piece into something final. And if animation, maybe some kind of comic strip storytelling, or like a wider narrative, how one kind of scene transitions into another and transitions into another, color palettes or perspective, that type of thing. So you'd be using some photography, maybe some drawing, that type of thing in those thumbnails. For things like photography, you would definitely be wanting to work into final pieces where you'd have a series of final pieces, especially where it tells a story. So think about if you went to travel to a different country and you took a lot of different photos of different food, or the street vendors that are selling food, and that became a series of these interesting lives, and you had some annotation and some writing around why that was interesting, why it was useful, or why it was unique to that area. That would be an idea for kind of photography and media. You might want to do some experimentation on Photoshop, Illustrator, or some mixed media where you're taking the photographs, you're scribbling on it, you're painting, that type of thing. For other creative disciplines, it's all of the above, all those things. But essentially, it's a willingness to experiment, a willingness to be able to succeed and fail, and evidence of just experimentation and engaging with the process. For fashion, textiles, or fine art, that type of thing, you'd be wanting evidence of kind of understanding 3D, understanding form, 4D maybe, or working with kind of installations, or at least the idea of how to develop it into an installation. Textiles, how things feel. You might want to put different materials like cotton and things like that, putting it into your sketchbook. Understanding what the materials are, the properties of materials, or how that relates to the story that you're trying to tell. You'd want to work with some kind of materials as well for textiles and fine art, where it's like muslin, cloth, clay, those types of things. And it's really useful that you can photograph those types of things and put those pictures in your portfolio or your sketchbook. If it's a digital portfolio or sketchbook, then it's easy to do that. You can take photographs, upload it, do your narrative and around that. It's a bit more difficult in a traditional paperback portfolio or paperback sketchbook, but you can still take photographs and stick it in and then write about it, or even cut little swatches of different materials, cut pieces of jeans or something like that and stick it in to show. Top tips are just to make it a habit. Make your sketchbook a habit, make it a ritual. If you go into your coffee shop, take your little book, take a pen, pencil, something with you. I have this little watercolour pen that I can fill with water and then empty it easily and just stick it in my pocket. Take that with me. So I can do a quick sketch in pencil, then go over it in pen, then watercolour over it. And that's a kind of developmental process that I enjoy. That's part of the ritual. Equally, you could find a quiet place. You could do it in the morning or evening, but it's setting some time aside. If you're not in full-time education where you're studying and stuff like that, just making time to set aside so that you can develop it. And then constantly reflecting on how you can take your inspiration into it. You always have time. You can always make time for anything. It's just finding the time and working things around. It might be waking up a little bit earlier or going to bed a bit later or doing a couple of scribbles during your lunch while you're eating, that type of thing. And you're making it personal, using photographs, using your daily life as inspiration, making the uninspiring inspiring, essentially. as a recap, your sketchbook is more than just a collection of drawings. It's a roadmap to your creative journey. It's an understanding of where you've started from in terms of your skills and your ideas and where it's finally come to. It's about you've built these kind of skills, you've built research skills, you've built idea generation, you've practiced with different things, you're telling a story, and you're taking it somewhere where you've got the ideas of a final piece, and you will have a final piece. At the end of your sketchbooks, you'll be able to make something that is deliverable. As it might be that after a whole sketchbook you have one final piece, or you might have a series of final pieces, or you might have several series of final pieces which eventually come to your sketchbook. But a sketchbook is just an ongoing developmental process of your growth, your experimentation, your story. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you see you soon. Stay tuned for more in this application series. Visit our website at www.bluemogu.co.uk for more research, resources, tips, tricks, application advice, free resources, portfolio services, one-to-one advice and guidance, and more.